Hi, it's Rob from the Brush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to paint a Bladeguard Lieutenant for the Space Wolves. If you'd like to support the channel, our Ko-fi and Patreon page is a link below. Now on to the video. So the first colour we're going to use is Vallejo White. It's going to be to do the shoulder pad, where we will be having the Bran Redmoor's Great Company icon on there, which is the wolf head with the red moor. We'll also be using this to do the little kind of belly armour piece. I can't think of the name of that offhand, but the background to that, and also the background to the shield. Now we're going to use some Vallejo Black to paint all the little bits between the armour plates, all these little seals, and that kind of thing. You can see certain parts of the miniature are sprayed black, others parts are sprayed with the army painter Wolf Grey. And the reason some parts are black is because they are the sections which are from the old Space Wolf plastic squad release, where you get tons of spare parts with those. So I've used some of those just to Space Wolf this Primaris Lieutenant up a little bit. Now I'm going to use some Mephiston Red. It's going to be to do the runes, like the actual runes on the rune stones there. Also to do the loincloth. So this is the Primaris Lieutenant who was in the Indomitus box and also with the Imperium magazine. It's a cracking pose. I've actually got one for the Knights of the Chalice too. Now I'm going to use a little bit of Khorne Red to do the wax sections for the purity seals, also the handle to the blade. I've actually got one of these Primaris Lieutenants ready to go into ultramarine colours as well. So if anyone would like to see an ultramarine Primaris Lieutenant, sing out in the comments below. Next up, Citadel Retributor Armour. Could be using this to paint up most of the decorative parts. You've got the skull and wings on the chest there. You've also got the wolf heads on that kind of belly armour, the skull with wings icon, which is coming off his power pack. Going to be doing the trim of the shield in this colour too. So there's quite a bit of gold on there, that'll make it stand out a little bit. Now we're going to use a tiny little bit of Cadian Fleshtone just to paint his skin. Very quick layer this. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Squig Orange. This is just going to be to do his hair. It's quite a nice base colour this because it's not too bright. It's not too dark, but it does give you that quite vibrant orange colour for hair. Like so. Next up we're going to be using Citadel Iron Hands Steel. Base colour, I'm going to be using this to do all of the Volkite pistol. The rear of the shield is also going to be this colour as well. You've got all the parts on the power pack, the little stand for the icon on his power pack there. A few other little details here and there. I'm going to use Citadel Rakarth Flesh. We're going to use this to do all of the bones, the scrolls, the parchment for the purity seals. That gives us a nice base for each of those. Like so. I'm going to use some Citadel Baneblade Brown. I'm going to use this to do all of his pouches, the holster and his belt. Use this to do the scabbard for that blade on the front there too. Using this and the Snakebite leather contrast is a really nice leather effect, I think. It's one of a couple that I use to do different shades of leather, so I'm always playing around with that, so you might see slightly different ones here and there. It's usually because I'm playing around with different colours or seeing how they look, trying a few little different things out on the pouches. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Liberator Gold. It's the final base colour we're using. I'm going to use this to do the skulls on the decoration on the front of this shield. Just try and get that into all the eyes and all the details on there. Like so. So the first shade we're going to use is Citadel Fugan Orange. I'm going to use this on the hair. That'll give a slightly darker orange shade to it, so it's not going to be overly dark and deep red, like if you use Carro Crimson, but it will give you that shade in the recesses and darken up the little bits of hair between where you're going to be colouring it in later. Now we're going to use a little bit of Seraphim Sepia. I'm going to use this on all these sections that we used the Rakarth flesh on. So any of those skulls, scrolls, bits of parchment, all those kinds of things, just give them a quick wash with the Seraphim Sepia. I'm going to use some Citadel Apothecary White. It's a glorious contrast colour this, it's just such a nice colour to shade the white with. So I'm just going to use this on all of the white areas of it, which is going to be the shield and the pauldrons. That little centre bit in his stomach too. But it does a really cracking job of shading. So I do recommend it. Now I'm going to use Citadel Agrax Earthshade. This is going to be used to do all of the gold. So that's the Liberator Gold and the Retributor Armour. You want to use this for all of them. If you splodge a little bit extra into the areas where it's going onto the white, try and absorb that with your brush again, so you don't get too dark a shade going onto that white section. Next shade is going to be Citadel Null Oil. I'm going to use this for all of the sections we use the Iron Hand Steel on. So any of the silvery coloured bits, we are going to use it on there. A little bit of Reichland Flesh Shade just for his skin. Very quick layer this one. Now Snakebite Leather Contrast. I'm going to use this to do all of the Baneblade Brown leather sections that we did earlier. We will be scuffing this up, but if you couldn't really be bothered doing scuffs and you wanted it to look pretty new, you you would just be able to leave the Snakebite leather contrast on top of the Baneblade brown, and that would give you a nice colour for your pouches and belts and that kind of stuff. But we'll be scuffing them up a little later in the video. Next up, Citadel Druchii Violet. I'm going to use this on the loincloth hanging down at the front there, and the little red tag on the scabbard. Also the scabbard at the back too, we're going to be using Druchii Violet on that to shade that up. Like so. Next up, Citadel Carro Crimson. I'm going to use this to do the hilt of the sword, like the grip. And then the wax sections for the purity seals too. The final shade is going to be Citadel Drakenhof Nightshade. This is just going to be to do all of the armour. Doing all of it rather than kind of pin washing with this. Because once you've got it underneath those legs and the arms, that will give it the shade to look like there's not as much light catching it. Whereas if you're doing the recesses, then the top and the bottom of the arm would be more or less the same colour. As always though, it is personal preference, so everyone has their own different methods of doing it. Now I'm going to start working on the armour plates. I'm going to start by reapplying this. If you think about where the light is catching it and where you're going to get shade, you want to be leaving shade in those recesses, leaving the Drakenhof Nightshade in the recesses too. But only covering bits that are going to be catching the light so that you get that natural look to how the armour is shaded. Now the next section of highlights is missing. The file was corrupted when I tried to upload it from a phone. So there's actually a section here which you don't see where I have used a little bit of white mixed with the rust grey to do the first highlights. Then you've got this highlight here, which is more of an edge highlight and just doing some of the wider areas of highlights there. You can see down that shin you've got the two different tones of rust grey, and on the little hip piece as well. So apologies for that, but the previous layer you want to be doing about 50% of the initial layer of rust grey that you've just reapplied. And for this layer you're just using this white added into the previous mix to do the edge highlights. Now we're going to start working on the gold. We're going to use Citadel Retribute Armour to reapply colour and shine back to the Retributor armour sections, leaving the shade in the recesses, and also not colouring in the bits which will be in the shade, like the undersides and things like that. Now we're going to use Citadel Liberator Gold to highlight the Retributor armour and also reapply the colour to the skulls on the shield as well. So you want to be catching the areas that are going to be getting more light with this one. So the areas that are going to have more reflection, you're going to be adding a little bit more of the Liberator Gold, probably about 50% of the area you covered with the Retributor armour. Or on those sections on the shield where you started with Liberator Gold, you want to be doing all the areas that be catching the light to give them a good shine. We are then going to add some Vallejo Modeler Chrome to the Liberator Gold. This will give it a nice shine, it'll lighten it up a lot, but because of the amount of pigment it gives it a really good shine. Now we're going to use Citadel Squig Orange. I'm going to start reapplying the base colour back to the hair. So you want to be leaving the shade in the recesses, and then on the areas where there isn't too many details, you just want to be brushing those on. So use a really fine brush. I'm using the Army Painter Wargamer character brush here. You're just going to be doing this and adding really thin lines to get that hair pattern onto the hair, just to give that a little bit of detail on the flatter surfaces. We're then going to highlight with Citadel Ryder Red. Think about where the light is going to be catching the hair. You want to be highlighting those areas. So the top of that top knot, the areas at the bottom where that's kind of splaying out. You can do it around the edges of the hair, around those kind of, I say, corners to the scalp as well. I mean the sort of the front and the sides of the scalp there, just to get those details shown up. Then we're going to add a tiny little bit of white to the mix and just do one final highlight, just picking out a few little details like the sides there. Now if you like your video to be slightly out of focus, you'll love this section, because I failed to click the focus lock on it, so it spends the whole time focusing on the base and my finger, which is really annoying. But here we're just picking out the details with that white and Wild Rider Red mix, just adding a few little shines to it. Now we're going to work on the face, and we're going to reapply some Cadian Fleshtone. So here you want to be picking out most of the face, leaving the shade in the recesses, so around the edge of the skin and where it joins onto the hair. You've got some pretty big creases because you've got that kind of snarling kind of shout expression. Also the details on these faces for the Space Wolves is pretty good. Again, this is one of the heads from the Space Wolf kits that you can get, the plastic Firstborn Marine Space Wolf kits. You get loads of extra parts and heads. I've just switched out the helm for this lieutenant with this head. Now I'm going to add a little bit of white to the Cadian Fleshtone, and this skips a little bit here because it was badly recorded on my part, apologies for that, and mostly painted out of shot. But you want to be covering about 50% of the area that you've just covered with the Cadian Fleshtone on its own. And on the next one we are going to add a little bit more white to the previous mix and just pick out some of those details. This is mainly just the tops and the extremes of each area, so you've got like maybe wrinkles on the head, cheekbones, the brows, any creases on the face. Just picking out the highest edges of those to make them stand out. More exceptional focus work there. Now I'm going to use a little tiny bit of Carro Crimson. Just going to do this around the eyes and the mouth. I'm going to use a tiny little spot of white to do each of the eyes, dragging the brush away from the nose to get those white spots in the right place. I'm also going to do the teeth by gently tapping the tip of the brush onto the fangs and each of the teeth. I'm going to work on the Mephiston Red, on that loincloth and a little kind of ribbon on his scabbard. So you're going to reapply this, leaving the shade in the recesses. So you'll have a nice dark shade in the middle of the recess, and then in those slight folds you'll have darker red where you've got thinner shade. And then you'll have the Mephiston Red on those raised areas. The same on the scabbard at the back there too. Now we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Evil Sun Scarlet, which is the start of that nice reddy orange colour that we want for this material. So you want to be doing about 50% of the Mephiston Red with the Evil Sun Scarlet now. That just gives it that nice brighter crease, so the light is catching those ridges in the material. And again, on the scabbard, about 50% of the previous area, you want to make sure that's covered too. So the areas that are catching the light are getting the brighter colours. Now we're going to use Citadel Ryder Red. I'm going to do this on the extremes of the brighter sections of the cloth, and also as edge highlights too. Like so. Next up, we're using Citadel Khorne Red. I'm going to reapply some of the colours back to the grip of the sword, and also to the wax sections of the purity seals. Now think about where the light's going to be catching it and leave the shade on the undersides. I'm going to start highlighting them using Citadel Wazdakka Red. So you want to be covering about 50% of the area that you did on the previous layer. Making sure that you're leaving the shade in the recesses still, and you're leaving some of that Khorne Red visible as well. Final highlight for these sections is Citadel Pink Horror. It's just to pick out some of the really fine details. I'm doing the tops of each section on the grip here, and then doing little tiny spots of light on the wax sections of the purity seals. This is just to put those final little specks of detail on there. Next we're going to reapply some Citadel Rakarth flesh to both the bones and also to the scrolls and the parchments of the purity seals. We'll be working on those sections separate, but because they're both Rakarth flesh to begin with, we want to reapply the colour to those. Now I'm going to use Citadel Ushabti bone. I'm going to use this to highlight the Rakarth flesh on the bone sections. The little skull piece that he's got on the chest shield here is actually for, or from, I should say, one of the Forge World resin kits, where it gives you various Space Wolf icons from them, which I've had for years and years since I used to do Space Wolves many moons ago. Now we're going to add white to the Citadel Ushabti bone, and we're going to do one final highlight just to pick out the details on each of these bone sections. Use a tiny spot of Vallejo Black just to put the spots in the eyes when I have him looking down that pistol, like so. Now I'm going to use the Rakarth flesh, add a little bit of white to it, and we're going to start highlighting the parchments on the purity seals, the rune stones, and also any bits of scroll work. As we've been going through, there is a couple of little scrolls on there that I've missed, which I've since recoloured and shaded and got to the same point as the other sections. I'm going to add a little tiny bit more white to the previous mix. I'm going to do highlights on these sections again. This is mainly just edge highlighting and the very top of the crests and creases on any of those bits of parchment, just to make those really stand out. Like so. Now I'm going to use some Vallejo White, or whichever white you use, just to reapply white to the pauldron, the sections of shield which are white, and also any other little details like that little bit on his stomach. We're now going to start working on his belt as well. So we're going to use Citadel Balor Brown. I'm going to start going across all the edges, doing horizontal strokes on the verticals and vertical strokes on the horizontals, just to give that rough, scuffed look to the leather. I'm going to add some Citadel Rakarth flesh to the Balor Brown, and we're just going to do exactly the same but covering slightly less area. The idea is you want to have those rough edges kind of overlapping and getting lighter, so that it does look like scuffs in the leather. Can add some more Rakarth flesh and do some final scuffs on the leather. Just to give that a really rough and well scraped look. I'm just going to add some Ahriman blue to this Volkite pistol. And a lot of pictures it just shows them as completely metallic, looking on like the 40k wiki and places like that. And then the odd one has them with a little blue glow, so I thought I'd give it a little bit of a blue glow inside there. We're going to shade that using Citadel Drakenhof Nightshade. Just apply some of that to each of these little sections. We're going to touch up the silver on this once we finish, so if you get it on any of those little silver ridges, that doesn't matter too much. Like so. While waiting for the shade to dry, we're going to use Vallejo Black. I'm just going to do some lines on each of the parchment sections for the purity seals. Now that it's dry, we're going to use Citadel Ahriman Blue once more to re-colour these sections on the Volkite pistol. We're going to add some Vallejo White to the Ahriman blue. Like so, just to give that a nice highlight and give it that glowing look. Adding a little bit more white to the previous mix. We're going to highlight a little bit less of it this time. So you've got those 3 stages of highlights. I'm going to keep doing this for a little bit longer. Going to add a little bit more white to the previous mix and do slightly less once again. I'm going to add a tiny little bit more Vallejo White to the mix. Just to get one more shaded highlight on before we use pure white. And finally the pure white, we're just going to do a tiny little spot at the top of each of these sections. Like so. Okay, so now we're going to use the Citadel Iron Hand Steel again. We're just going to pick out some of the details of the Iron Hand Steel, just to make some little nice highlights to those metallics. We're going to recolour some of these top ridges where we might have got some of that blue shade on, or the Ahriman blue or anything like that. Now we're going to start working on the shoulder pad and getting the Bran Redmoor's Great Company icon on here. Now there'll be a full tutorial of this coming up soon. I'm going to be using one of the other miniatures that I'm going to be using for the Great Company. But you can get the idea of how this is coming along, starting at the top and working your way down. Then once you've got the rough shape on there, you're going to be using a little bit of Citadel Mephiston Red to paint on that bottom part, and then once that bottom part's in place, you're going to be tweaking that left, right and centre to get it A, even, and B, looking right. So you can see there you've got an overhang of one of his jowls on the right hand side there, so that gets trimmed right back. And the eyes and the blood drops all get added to that on the full tutorial for you. That is the finished Bladeguard Lieutenant for the Space Wolves. Really happy with how it turned out. It's the first Space Wolf I've painted in quite some time. Looking forward to painting more of those over the next year or so. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of our other social media, linked below. Thanks very much. If you like the channel and you enjoy the content, we'd really appreciate your support. We've got our Coffee and Patreon pages linked below. Thanks very much.